Tonight, we drift back to Edwardian London, 1901, a city draped in gaslight and mourning veils, where the air tasted of coal smoke and the death of an empire's queen still hung heavy. At the Royal Lyceum Theatre, velvet curtains swayed like funeral cloths. Chandeliers trembled above an audience hungry for tragedy. On that stage stood Clarissa Moore, the soprano critics called London Songbird. Her voice so pure it could pierce stone. But before the aria reached its climax, her song collapsed into silence. She fell, white silk pooling at her feet, a crumpled note hidden in her glove. 6 words only. The curtain will fall before the end. The newspapers called it exhaustion. The public called it destiny. And the theater? The theater whispered it had claimed another soul. More than a century later, we're still haunted by that unfinished performance. They found the note inside her glove. Not a love letter, not a suicide confession, not even a diary fragment. Just one short line scratched in black ink, the kind that smudges when your hand trembles. The curtain will fall before the end. That was it. 6 words. No signature. No context. But it was folded carefully, like something meant to be discovered. And it was still warm from her hand when the usher picked it up from the stage floor after she collapsed. The audience thought it was part of the act. Of course they did. 1901 London thrived on spectacle. Fainting, gasping, stage deaths. Opera singers practiced swoons as much as they did scales. But this wasn't rehearsed. When Clarissa Moore, rising star, velvet voice soprano, stumbled mid-aria at the Royal Lyceum Theatre, the orchestra faltered, the conductor froze, and for a breathless few seconds, nobody knew whether to clap or scream. And then the silence broke. Some people laughed nervously, assuming melodrama. Others pointed. One man in the front swore he saw her lips move, whispering something no one else could hear. The stagehand swore she was already gone before she hit the boards. Backstage chaos erupted. Actors rushing, costumers fainting, stagehands scrambling for water, brandy, a doctor, anything. And all the while, her white-gloved hand hung limp, fingers still curled around that cryptic scrap of paper. The newspapers ate it alive. The Times called it the most haunting finale in the history of English theater. The penny illustrated splashed her portrait across its cover, the headline shrieking, "Songbird silenced." And every whispering crowd, every backroom gossip circle, fixated not on her death, but on that note. What curtain? What end? Whose hand guided hers when she wrote it? And why did a woman with everything, a glittering career, aristocratic patrons, a fiancé from high society, choose her final words to sound like a warning? It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Clarissa's life was meant crescendo. Instead, it ended on a discordant note that echoes even now, more than a century later, because some witnesses insist she didn't fall naturally. They say she recoiled as if someone or something was standing behind her in that spotlight. And maybe that's why no one in the theater remembers the applause. They only remember the hush, the sickening hush, as if the whole city of London leaned in, waiting to see what would happen after the curtain finally fell. London in 1901 was a paradox wrapped in soot. The empire was at its height, but its streets reeked of horse dung and coal smoke. You could sip champagne in the Savoy and step outside to see a child choking on smog, barefoot and hawking newspapers. The year itself was a funeral bell. Queen Victoria had just died in January, and in the Victorian era, and the new king, Edward VII, was too busy gambling and betting actresses to look like anything but a symbol of decadence. And the theater, God, the theater was a mirror of that contradiction. It was both sacred temple and carnival sideshow. Respectable families went to gasp at Shakespeare revivals, while men with cigars and too much money leaned forward to ogle chorus girls under the hot gaslights. Opera houses and music halls were packed nightly, buzzing with cheap perfume, spilled brandy, and a collective hunger to escape the grind of industrial life. The Lyceum Theatre, where Clarissa sang her last note, wasn't just a stage, it was a shrine. Bram Stoker, the same man who wrote Dracula, was its manager not long before, and his shadow lingered in every crimson curtain and Gothic arch. Imagine the chandeliers dripping with light, the velvet seats crammed with London's elite. The air vibrated with anticipation every time the orchestra tuned. Performances weren't just art, they were status symbols. Being seen at the Lyceum meant you belonged. But London had another hunger: death. This was a city that gawked at Jack the Ripper's handiwork, that devoured penny dreadfuls and murder ballads, that lined up to view wax figures of executed criminals at Madame Tussauds. Audiences craved tragedy the way addicts crave laudanum. And so, when a woman dropped dead mid-performance, the line between theater and reality blurred deliciously. Was it divine punishment? Was it scandal? Was it murder dressed as melodrama? Even the setting of that night, April 19th, 1901, adds a sinister gleam. It was Holy Friday, the day churches draped themselves in black, bells rang mournful tones, and Christians whispered of sacrifice and resurrection. Yet thousands chose not to pray, but to indulge in theater. A soprano collapsing in white satin, bathed in stage light like a sacrificial lamb, fit the mood a little too perfectly, and that glove, with its cryptic message, felt almost preordained. In a city obsessed with omens, people saw it as prophecy. Clergy called it a warning against vanity. Socialites treated it as an inside joke at dinner parties. But for those who actually knew her, the note was a razor slashing through the carefully woven illusion of safety. The stage was London itself, beautiful, dirty, glittering, cursed. And Clarissa Moore, whether she knew it or not, was walking onto it as both performer and victim. Clarissa Moore wasn't just another pretty soprano. She was a kind of woman gossip columnists described with too many adjectives, because one never seemed enough. Radiant, ethereal, tragic, magnetic. Born in 1876 to a middle-class tailor in Bloomsbury, she was supposed to live an ordinary life. A husband, children, a small house where the wallpaper peeled by the fireplace. That was the script, but she was cursed or blessed, with a voice that could shatter both glass and expectation. Her first appearance on stage was almost an accident. At 17, she sang in a church recital so feverishly that parishioners swore they felt the wooden pews tremble. A music tutor in attendance, wealthy, married, scandalously smitten, offered her lessons. Within 3 years, Clarissa was performing in salons of Mayfair, drawing both aristocrats and dilettantes who didn't know whether to admire her voice or the way she never quite looked anyone in the eyes. The truth is, people love her not just for what she sang, but for what she embodied. Longing. Every aria she performed seemed like confession. She wasn't like the overripe sopranos bloated with ego. She carried a kind of fragility that made audiences lean forward, as if protecting her. The paradox. She looked like she could vanish at any second, and yet she commanded a stage like a queen. By the time she was 24, she was the darling of the Lyceum. Aristocrats fought for her company. Painters begged to capture her profile. The press treated her like London's Songbird, a symbol of beauty in a grimy age. She was engaged, too, to Edmund Harcourt, a barrister with connections to the House of Lords. Respectable, wealthy, clean-cut. The match was written up in the Daily Telegraph as a union of art and law, beauty and intellect. But here's where the cracks start to show. Clarissa wasn't as simple as her fairy tale headlines. She wrote letters, strange letters, to friends, to herself, sometimes to no one at all. Pages filled with odd lines about shadows in the rafters, about hearing whispers while she practiced alone in the theater, about feeling her breath stolen mid-note, as if something invisible clutched her lungs. Her maid once described waking at night to find Clarissa sitting upright, humming under her breath, eyes open but unseeing. She also had enemies, though society never admitted aloud. Fellow sopranos whispered she was a fraud, a mere pretty face propped up by patrons. Stagehands claimed she treated rehearsals like seances, pacing alone on the stage with the gaslights dimmed. And one rival critic, whose name was conveniently omitted in archives, wrote a blistering review that ended with, "Her voice will be her undoing." It's tempting, in hindsight, to see her as doomed from beginning. But in 1901, all anyone saw was a young woman at her peak. White gloves, pearl necklace, a future so bright it blinded those who watched. And yet, deep down, Clarissa herself must have sensed something gnawing at the edges of her story. Why else write that note? Why else whisper of shadows where no one else could see? It began as a rumor, as these things always do. A missed rehearsal here, a nervous laugh there. Clarissa, punctual to the point of severity, started arriving late. She would flinch at the sound of footsteps behind her in empty corridors. One violinist swore she refused to rehearse alone, insisting someone, anyone, remain in the wings while she sang. The first real rupture came 2 weeks before the fatal performance. She was rehearsing the third act of La Somnambula, the role that would cement her career. Witnesses say she hit the aria's climax, the kind of note that made chandeliers shake, when suddenly her voice cracked, an ugly, shattering break. She clutched her throat and fell silent. The conductor rushed to her side, asking if she was ill. She shook her head, eyes wide, whispering, "Didn't you see him?" No one had, but Clarissa insisted, a figure in the back row, tall, faceless, dressed in black, watching. Stagehands checked. The theater was empty, but she refused to return to the stage that day. Her fiancé, Edmund Harcourt, tried to calm her, chalking it up to exhaustion, to nerves. But her maid later testified that Clarissa didn't sleep that night, or any night that followed. She paced, muttered, wrote in her notebook until dawn. The second disturbance came days later. The costumer discovered one of her gowns, white silk, meant for her final aria, sliced open. Not clumsily, precisely, as though someone had taken a razor and traced the exact shape of her body. When questioned, Clarissa only said flatly, "He wants me dressed for it." By then, whispers spread to Lyceum. Some blamed rival singers. Others whispered of stalkers, obsessed admirers who lingered outside the stage door. But Clarissa herself didn't accuse anyone by name. She just kept writing notes, cryptic lines, half poems, fragments like, "The stage is a coffin, and I am rehearsing the burial. They wait in the curtains, patient as spiders. My voice is no longer my own." And then came the rehearsal before the show. She stood under the lights, trembling but determined, when suddenly gas lamps flickered and hissed. Several witnesses described the same thing, a loud crack, like glass shattering, though no glass had broken. Clarissa gasped, dropped her score, and fled the stage midline. She refused to speak of it afterward, only told her maid, "If the curtain falls, let it fall fast." The audience on April 19th would think her collapse spontaneous, an act of cruel chance. But for those who had watched the days leading up, it was no surprise. Something had been stalking her, whether a man, an obsession, or her own unraveling mind. And the scariest part? Everyone saw the cracks. No one stopped the performance. You would think a soprano dropping dead mid-performance would have a clean answer, heart failure, perhaps, or a fainting spell gone wrong. But with Clarissa Moore, the facts curdled immediately. The doctor summoned that night gave 2 entirely different accounts, one to the theater staff and another to the coroner, to the panicked stagehands. He said she was gone before she hit the ground. No pulse, no breath. But on the official death certificate, he scrawled syncope due to exhaustion, a polite medical shrug. And then there were the witnesses. One swore she had clutched her throat as though choking. Another claimed she smiled, just faintly, before collapsing. A third insisted she whisper name, though which name changed depending on who told the story. The orchestra, too, couldn't agree. Some said the conductor dropped his baton in shock, while others insisted he kept conducting maniacally, as though the performance must go on no matter what. The note in her glove deepened the fracture. The curtain will fall before the end. Too theatrical to be accidental. Too precise to be coincidence. Some newspapers called it proof of a premeditated suicide, while others spun it as evidence of foul play, a message planted to frame her tragedy as art. Even her handwriting was debated. Her maid swore it was hers, delicate and slanted. Edmund Harcourt, her fiancé, claimed it looked forged. The public, meanwhile, delighted in imagining she had written it mid-aria, as though singing her own prophecy into being. And then the body, her body, became a problem. She was supposed to be buried quietly, respectably, in Brompton Cemetery. But the undertakers reported something odd. The muscles of her jaw were locked tight, stiff before rigor mortis should have set in. They pried her mouth open to prepare her, and one swore he heard a faint whistle of air escape, as though a note had been trapped in her throat all along. Rumors exploded that she had been poisoned with some rare toxin that attacked the lungs, that she had been cursed by a jealous rival, that the Lyceum itself was haunted and had claimed her as a sacrifice. Clergy seized a moment, preaching that her death on Holy Friday was divine punishment for vanity and pride. Playwrights ghoulishly speculated about dramatizing her story. And then, as if on cue, letters began arriving at the theater. Anonymous, scrawled in jagged handwriting. She is not the first. The stage always takes what is owed. Listen to the rafters and you will hear the others. No one knew who sent them. Some believed it was a prank. Others swore the ink was identical to the note in her glove. Whatever happened that night, it was no longer just a tragedy. It was becoming a legend, one too twisted for neat explanations. Because every retelling contradicted the last, and the truth of Clarissa Moore's death seemed to dissolve under the spotlight, just like her voice, fading, trembling, unfinished. The inquest should have closed the matter. That's what coroners do. Tidy chaos into Latin phrases. Make death palatable. But Clarissa's inquest played more like a scandalous drama. The courtroom was stuffed. Critics, rivals, aristocrats in veils. Curious nobodies hoping to see society's Songbird dissected like an autopsy. The first theory was the obvious one. Exhaustion. She was overworked, nervous, fragile. Opera singers collapse all the time, don't they? The coroner clung to that narrative like a drowning man to driftwood. But the jurors squirmed when her maid took the stand and testified about Clarissa's sleepless nights, the sliced gown, the muttered warnings about a man in black. Exhaustion sounded thin when paired with paranoia. Then came the poison theory. A physician claimed a locked jaw and sudden collapse suggested strychnine, a toxin fashionable among poisoners. Strychnine twisted the body, choked the throat, left its victims frozen in grotesque rigor. It fit too well, but no trace was found in her stomach, though forensic science in 1901 was as trustworthy as fortune-telling. Still, whispers of a poisoned glass of champagne in her dressing room lingered long after the inquest adjourned. The fiancé, Edmund Harcourt, endured his own theory. Was he the jealous architect of her end? A barrister who could manipulate law? Desperate to protect his reputation from a fiancé scribbling cryptic notes and claiming phantoms? He denied it furiously, pale and trembling, though his insistence that the note was forged only deepened suspicion. Why? People wondered, was he so sure? But the darkest theories didn't come from the lawyers. They came from the stagehands, the ones who lived in the bowels of the theater. They spoke of the Lyceum ghost, a shadow seen flitting along the rafters for decades. Some claimed it was the spirit of an actor who had died in a fire years earlier, trapped behind collapsing scenery. Others said it was older, that the ground beneath the Lyceum had once been a plague pit, and restless souls clung to the theater like barnacles. And there was one more, buried in the coroner's notes, rarely reprinted by newspapers. A stagehand insisted he saw her lips moving after she collapsed, forming words though no sound came out. He swore under oath that she whispered, "Not me, not me, not me what? Not me dying, not me writing that note, or not me on that stage at all." Theories multiplied like rats. Suicide disguised as performance, murder hidden in plain sight, supernatural interference, a nervous breakdown turned terminal. And the worst part was how quickly the city lost interest in justice. The police closed the file within weeks. No arrests, no poison vial discovered, no second handwriting analysis. The case was left to gossip and ghost stories. Clarissa's death stopped being an investigation and became theater all over again. Everyone in London had a theory, and none of them agreed. Every mystery has that one moment, the fracture where the story either collapses into farce or sharpens into horror. For Clarissa's case, it came not in the courtroom, but in the theater itself. Weeks after her burial, the Lyceum tried to reopen. New performers were hired, new productions staged. The city, fickle as always, was eager for distraction. But the first night back, during a matinee rehearsal, the soprano chosen to replace Clarissa stopped midline. She swore she heard humming, not from the orchestra pit, not from backstage, from above, the rafters, the ropes, the black cavern where stagehands rarely dare to look. A woman's voice, faint, unfinished, carrying the exact melody Clarissa had failed to complete before collapsing. The soprano fainted on the spot. Afterward, crew members swore the gas lamps flickered in perfect rhythm, as though applauding, and that was only the beginning. Within days, other performers reported strange incidents. Props misplaced, stage ropes snapping without reason, costumes tampered with. One actor swore he found his shoes filled with shards of glass. A cellist refused to enter the orchestra pit again after feeling something cold wrap around his ankle mid-performance. The management, terrified of losing revenue, tried to bury it. But gossip is harder to silence than any ghost. Word leaked that someone had broken into Clarissa's dressing room weeks after her death. Nothing stolen, nothing vandalized, just a note left behind on her mirror. Encore. And here's the grotesque punchline. Edmund Harcourt, her grieving fiancé, broke his silence in the press, not to defend her memory, but to denounce the theater. He claimed the Lyceum management had orchestrated her death as a publicity stunt. Poison, sabotage, even hypnotism. He threw accusations like daggers. He said Clarissa had confided her terror to him, that she feared she was being forced into a narrative not her own. She was made into a character, he raged, and when the act demanded her death, they killed her. It was sensational, unbelievable, and yet horribly compelling. Audiences who had once pitied him now wondered if he was right, or if he was mad. The Lyceum, once a temple of drama, became a circus of whispers. Was Clarissa's death murder disguised as art? Was the haunting real? Was Edmund protecting her memory or destroying it? The turning point wasn't the collapse itself. It was what came after. Clarissa's tragedy metastasized, consuming the theater, her fiancé, her rivals, her admirers. No one could watch a performance at the Lyceum again without wondering if the ghost in the rafters was applauding, or waiting for the next singer to drop. The show didn't just go on. It twisted, warped, broke. Resolution? Don't make me laugh. If there was ever a case allergic to neat conclusions, it was Clarissa Moore's. Officially, the file closed with syncope due to exhaustion. That phrase sits in the archives like a bad joke, a bureaucratic epitaph scrawled by men who wanted the curtain down. House lights up, everyone go home. But unofficially, the questions multiplied until they strangled the answers. Was it suicide? If so, why marry a barrister? Why book future performances? Why scribble notes that sounded more like warnings and farewells? Suicide implies intent, clarity, choice. Clarissa's scribbling suggested anything but. They read like a woman pursued. Murder? Plausible. Poison was never proven, but the gown slashed like a chalk outline. The strange note, the fiancé's paranoia. They drip with menace. Yet no suspect ever emerged. No rival arrested, no stagehand tried, no evidence beyond whispers and shredded silk. Murder without a murderer is just another ghost story. The supernatural? Here's where even the skeptics hesitate. Too many witnesses swore they heard her voice after death. Too many anonymous letters landed on the Lyceum's doorstep. Too many replacements fled the stage after claiming to see her in the rafters. You can dismiss one claim, two maybe, but dozens? Entire cast rattled? Entire audiences shuddering at a sudden draft in the balcony? Even the rational start to squirm. And then there's Edmund Harcourt's final act. Months after her death, he left London, abandoning his career. But not before he wrote one blistering pamphlet, accusing the Lyceum of sacrificing Clarissa to its own mythology. He claimed theater was a machine that devours the souls of the living to feed the illusions of the crowd. He insisted Clarissa knew that her final note, "The curtain will fall before the end," wasn't despair but protest, a scream against being written into a script she didn't author. So what do we believe? That she collapsed from exhaustion, just another fragile soprano consumed by pressure? That she was poisoned by rivals or lovers or faceless enemies? That the Lyceum itself demanded its sacrifice, a theater haunted not by ghosts but by an audience's ravenous appetite for tragedy? No resolution satisfies because none of them erase the image of her body crumpling on stage. Glove, still holding a note like an omen. And maybe that's the cruelest truth. The ambiguity isn't a flaw. It's the legacy. Clarissa Moore became immortal not through music, but through questions that can't be silenced. The curtain fell. The play never ended. The aftermath of Clarissa Moore's death was less like mourning and more like scavenging. The city picked over her tragedy like vultures at a battlefield. The Lyceum tried to scrub the blood from its curtains, metaphorically speaking. They staged new operas, but audiences whispered through every performance, waiting for the soprano to faint, watching the rafters instead of the stage. Within 2 years, attendance plummeted. Investors withdrew. By 1905, the once great theater shuttered temporarily, officially for renovations. Unofficially, no one wanted to sing where Clarissa had fallen. Her fiancé, Edmund Harcourt, never married. His pamphlet, half rant, half manifesto, circulated underground, quoted in bohemian circles as if it were holy scripture. The stage is not art, it is appetite. It feeds on blood and applauds only death. Theater managers despised him. Poets adored him. By the 1920s, he'd been forgotten, except by a small cult of dramatists who insisted Clarissa was theater's first modern martyr. Culturally, she became myth. Painters rendered her collapse as if it were religious iconography. Clarissa draped in white silk like a fallen angel, spotlight as halo. Ghost stories proliferated, with the Lyceum dubbed the house that ate a soprano. Guides on London's haunted tours still stop outside its doors, telling wide-eyed tourists that if you hum her aria at midnight, the curtains will stir though the windows are bolted shut. And then there's a ripple effect, the untraceable psychological scar. Ask any performer in London's West End, even now, about Clarissa Moore, and you'll get the same uneasy glance, as if her name is an omen, A reminder that under the glamour lies risk. That fame can be a coffin lined in velvet. That the audience doesn't care if you die, so long as you die on cue. Her story seeded a paranoia in theater culture. Insurance policies for performers grew stricter. Stage managers doubled down on safety. Directors quietly instructed understudies what to do. If a star pulled a Clarissa, it became shorthand. A joke, but also a curse. And through it all, the note remained. The curtain will fall before the end. 6 words, endlessly reprinted, quoted, carved into mythology of performance itself. They appeared on postcards, in novels, even as graffiti outside theaters decades later. Clarissa Moore didn't live to sing her final aria. Instead, she became one, an unfinished note echoing across time. Her death was less an end than a stain, on the Lyceum, on London, on art itself. Because the truth is, she got exactly what she predicted. The curtain fell, not just on her life, but on an era of theater that never recovered from the suspicion that behind every spotlight lurks a shadow, waiting for its next encore. There's something obscene about how we talk about her, as if Clarissa Moore wasn't a woman, but a plot device written into the city's favorite ghost story. London loved her collapse because it blurred the border between theater and reality. And God, don't we always want that border blurred? Don't we crave it? Think about it. Audiences paid for illusion, but they were handed death. The most authentic performance of her life happened when she wasn't acting, and they applauded. Some even cheered. Imagine gasping at a woman's body hitting the floor, then standing to clap as if tragedy itself had rehearsed. Clarissa warned us. The note wasn't cryptic. It was indictment. The curtain will fall before the end. That was her saying. This play isn't mine. This script isn't mine. I'm just another actress in a machine that will chew me up before I can finish my line. And we let it happen. Every ghost story told about her is less about her than about us, about how audiences devour performers, how fame sharpens its teeth on fragile throats, about how the line between spectacle and sacrifice was always razor thin. Maybe the Lyceum wasn't haunted by spirits, but by hunger, the endless, gnawing appetite of the crowd. We talk about Clarissa as a mystery because it's easier than admitting she was right. Because if we admit she was right, then every encore we demanded since 1901 has blood on it. So yes, the curtain fell. It fell before the end. But the end never came, did it? It's still suspended, unfinished, because we're still watching, still whispering, still clapping at the possibility that someone else will give us another unforgettable finale. And if you walk past the Lyceum at night, when the fog is low and the street lamps are gasping their last light, you might hear it, the faint hum of a soprano in the rafters, not singing for art, not for applause, just reminding us that the performance never ended. It never will. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.